The early morning stillness, a fragile veil across the Denver skyline, was abruptly, violently torn apart. Not by a natural disaster nor a sudden alarm, but by a sound far more chilling. A human voice, sharp as a honed blade, slicing through the quiet air. If you've ever felt the absolute gut-wrenching dread of a familiar peace being shattered by an unwelcome intrusion, then you understand the jolt that ripped through Rachel Adams at precisely 7 a.m. In an instant, the world, or at least her world, felt as if it had caught fire. Not with actual flames, but with the searing heat of indignation. This wasn't just a story about a bad morning. It was the story of a breaking point, a woman pushed to the edge of her sanity, and the electrifying moment she decided to take her life back. You're about to witness the raw, unflinching battle for independence, fought not on a grand stage, but within the suffocating confines of a two-bedroom apartment. Prepare to be immersed in a tale of silent fury, unwavering resilience, and the sweet, hard-won victory of reclaiming oneself when everything feels lost. Don't look away now, because this transformation is about to begin. The dawn of a battleground. At the exact stroke of 7 o'clock, the Denver apartment, usually a haven of quiet reflection, erupted. Helen Adams, her face a mask of furious disapproval, leaned over Rachel's bed, her voice a piercing shriek that resonated with the force of a full-blown inferno. 7 and you're still asleep? Get up and make me breakfast right now. The words were spat with such venomous proximity and ear-splitting volume that Rachel's body convulsed, a violent jerk that sent her heart slamming against her ribs. For a disorienting, terrifying moment, she was utterly lost, a victim of sudden awakening with no sense of place or time. Then, her eyes found the familiar contours of her own bedroom ceiling, the worn patterns she knew so intimately, and the stark reality of her situation crashed over her like a freezing wave. It was happening again. Only 3 short hours earlier, at a bleary-eyed 4 a.m., Rachel had finally collapsed into bed, her body aching, her mind buzzing, after yet another grueling marathon of digital projects for her demanding clients. Her work as a digital consultant was relentless, demanding 16-hour days glued to a computer screen, a relentless cycle of problem-solving and client management that left her utterly drained. Yet, it was also profoundly rewarding, both creatively and financially. She earned 3 times what her husband Mark brought home from his conventional office job, a testament to her skill and tireless dedication. But in Helen's distorted worldview, none of that mattered. To Mark's mother, Rachel's entire existence was a testament to laziness, a shocking display of unworthiness. She saw a wife who defiantly refused to embrace the real duties of a woman, the endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and serving, a domestic goddess enslaved to the kitchen and the mop. This jarring awakening was not an isolated incident. It was a ritual, a harrowing morning symphony of accusations that had become the soundtrack to Rachel's life for the past 3 agonizing weeks. Helen and Frank, Mark's parents, had descended upon their modest 2-bedroom apartment, ostensibly for a short visit, that had, with each passing day, stretched into an eternity of suffocation. The air inside their once peaceful home had thickened with every passing moment, growing heavier, laden with unspoken resentment and thinly veiled disdain. Every petty complaint, every cutting remark about Rachel's supposed failings, every insidious comment on how she wasn't raised right, chipped away at her spirit. Their oppressive presence had transformed her sanctuary into a veritable prison, a place where the simple act of waking up had become a terrifying ordeal she dreaded with every fiber of her being. Helen's favorite weapon, her most cherished topic of righteous indignation, was Rachel's career. She flatly refused to acknowledge it as legitimate because it didn't involve the traditional ritual of leaving the house every morning. No amount of patient explanation, no detailed recounting of the 16 intense hours Rachel dedicated daily to managing complex corporate accounts across the nation could penetrate Helen's fortified prejudice. She simply dismissed it, with a dismissive wave of her hand and a condescending sneer, as playing on the computer. Every single conversation, regardless of its initial direction, invariably circled back to the same insidious accusation. Rachel didn't have a real job. Frank Adams, Mark's father, was a man of fewer words than his tempestuous wife, but his criticisms landed with an equally devastating impact. His culinary palate was remarkably narrow, limited almost exclusively to heavy, greasy, unapologetically unhealthy meals. Fried chicken glistening with fat, biscuits literally dripping with butter, mountains of bacon. Rachel, on the other hand, gravitated towards lighter, healthier fare. Grilled fish, vibrant vegetable stir-fries, fresh salads. To Frank, these were not merely different preferences. They were an affront, an insult to his very manhood. He would grunt from the kitchen table, pushing away a perfectly prepared plate as if it were poison, declaring with theatrical disgust that she didn't know how to feed a man. He'd mutter under his breath, "What kind of wife serves rabbit food?" A rhetorical question laced with contempt. Since their arrival, Rachel had stoically tried to endure, repeating to herself the mantra that losing her temper would only escalate the situation, that biting her tongue was the unavoidable price of peace. But 3 weeks of this relentless emotional siege had worn her thin, fraying her nerves to a threadbare state. She had surrendered her quiet, precious mornings, abandoned her established routine, and sacrificed most of her sanity in a desperate, futile attempt to avoid another bitter confrontation. Yet still, it wasn't enough. Helen, it seemed, genuinely believed it was her sacred, divinely appointed duty to remind Rachel at every conceivable opportunity that she was simply not good enough. Not as a wife, not as a homemaker, and certainly not as a woman. Now, standing over Rachel's bed, Helen's arms were defiantly crossed, her foot tapping an impatient rhythm on the floor, her eyes flashing with a righteous indignation that bordered on fury. "I said, get up! The apartment is a mess and Mark will be home for lunch. His shirts aren't even ironed. What have you been doing all this time?" Her voice grew sharper with each succeeding word, each syllable a tiny, painful jab. Rachel slowly pushed herself upright, her head a throbbing weight from the severe lack of sleep. She pressed her lips together, a thin, tight line, swallowing back the surge of raw fury that boiled in her chest. The truth, hot and undeniable, was that she wanted to scream, to unleash a torrent of suppressed anger, to physically throw Helen out of her room, to remind her in no uncertain terms that she had absolutely no right to burst in like this to desecrate her last bastion of privacy. But she didn't, not yet. She had, through sheer force of will, learned to control her immediate reactions, to breathe deeply, deliberately, until the agonizing moment of confrontation passed. A chilling thought flickered through her exhausted mind. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a battleground, a hostile territory, and every single morning felt like waking into another unwinnable fight she hadn't chosen. A conflict imposed upon her. Rachel's hands trembled as she pushed the blanket aside, a tremor born not of fear, but of immense, almost unbearable restraint. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her bones, that she couldn't endure this oppressive torment forever. For now, though, she remained silent, a silent, seething tempest. She watched Helen storm out of the room, muttering a string of insults under her breath, while from the kitchen, Frank's booming voice drifted in, demanding a hearty breakfast that Rachel didn't even possess the strength to contemplate, let alone cook. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second longer, steeling herself, gathering the last vestiges of her strength. She would hold it in for now. But the cracks were undeniably forming, spiderwebbing across her composure, and she could feel something deep inside her, something fundamental beginning to irrevocably shift. The spark of defiance. Helen, far from being finished, merely escalated her campaign of psychological warfare. Storming out of the bedroom, she launched into a loud, performative parade through the small Denver apartment, a one-woman riot of domestic chaos. Doors were slammed with aggressive finality, curtains were tugged open with unnecessary force, and a constant low murmur of complaints about non-existent. Dust on shelves filled the air. Drawers were yanked open and shut with a violent clatter, chairs dragged across the floor with a grating screech, as if she were meticulously staging some elaborate domestic battlefield where only she could emerge victorious, a triumphant general of cleanliness. This theatrical display of chaos, Rachel knew, wasn't truly about cleaning. It was about making a definitive point, about proving in Helen's eyes that Rachel was, utterly and unequivocally, a failure. From the kitchen, the gruff sound of Frank's voice, thick with irritation and the vestiges of sleep, rumbled through the apartment. He had finally stirred, his hair a disheveled mess, his face still puffy from a night of heavy slumber. "What's going on out there? And where's breakfast? A man can't live on coffee and salads. You've got nothing ready." His tone carried the immense weight of expectation, a silent, demanding decree that a hearty meal should simply materialize before him without question or effort. Rachel stood frozen in the living room for a moment, her patience already stretched to its absolute limit, splintering like fragile glass under immense, unyielding pressure. For 3 excruciating weeks, she had listened, she had endured, she had swallowed her pride and her anger in the desperate, often misguided name of peace. But this morning, after being violently jolted awake and subjected to yet another barrage of humiliating ridicule, something deep within her, a long-dormant spark, refused to remain silent any longer. A strange, almost alien sense of calm settled over her. She walked into the living room, her face pale, almost translucent, but her voice, when it came, was sharp, steady, and utterly unwavering. "Enough," she declared, the single word cutting through Helen's incessant rambling like a razor. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave my home." The room fell into an immediate, profound stillness, the sudden silence so absolute it was almost deafening. The only sound was the rhythmic, relentless ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the passage of moments that felt like an eternity. Helen blinked once, twice, her eyes wide with stunned disbelief that Rachel, of all people, had dared to speak with such audacious finality, with such unexpected authority. Then her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a cruel, dismissive sneer. "You're home? Don't flatter yourself, Rachel. This is Mark's apartment. You don't get to throw me out of my son's place. You are nothing here." From the kitchen, Frank grunted in satisfied agreement, a low guttural sound of triumph. "Exactly. Don't forget whose name is on the family. You'd be nowhere without him." Rachel felt her hands clench into tight, trembling fists at her sides, the white-hot fury a burning inferno in her chest. She took a deliberate step closer, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, but remaining utterly unshakable. "This apartment was bought with our savings, and we're still paying the mortgage together. Your son couldn't have done it alone. Don't pretend you helped us. You didn't give a single dollar, so don't stand here and act like I'm living in some gift you handed down." Helen's face flushed a vivid, angry red, her indignation flaring brighter than ever, fueled by Rachel's defiance. "All you think about is money. That's all you care about. You're ungrateful, selfish." Rachel cut her off, her voice devoid of emotion, a cold, hard shield. "I think about fairness, and I'm telling you both, you are guests here, nothing more. And I will not live another day under your insults." For a moment, a heavy, oppressive silence pressed down on the room once more. Frank shifted uncomfortably in the kitchen, but for once said nothing further, his bluster temporarily deflated. Helen's chest rose and fell with the weight of her barely contained outrage, her entire body rigid, vibrating with a fury that seemed poised to explode again at any second. But Rachel had already turned away, her decision made, etched in stone. Inside, Rachel knew, with chilling clarity, that she couldn't possibly win this war alone. Mark wasn't home yet, and confronting his parents without his presence, without his support, was a battle stacked overwhelmingly against her. They would undoubtedly twist her words, escalate the situation with their practiced manipulation until she was utterly cornered, defenseless. She could already hear Helen muttering a fresh stream of insults under her breath, already feel Frank's palpable disapproval radiating from the kitchen like oppressive heat. Rachel drew a deep, fortifying breath, steadying herself, gathering her resolve. The confrontation, she knew, wasn't truly over. It couldn't be, not with Helen and Frank so deeply entrenched in their self-righteousness, so convinced of their own infallible truth. But she had, at long last, drawn her line in the sand, a clear and undeniable boundary. And even if Mark chose to ignore it later, even if he tried to casually brush her off with his usual dismissiveness, Rachel knew, deep in her heart, that she had taken the first real, definitive step. She had spoken her truth, loud and clear, and she would not, under any circumstances, be silenced again. As Helen continued her furious pacing, slamming cabinet doors with renewed vigor and tossing fresh accusations into the already heavy air, Rachel quietly, deliberately gathered her composure. She understood, with a newfound wisdom, when to fight head-on and when to strategically step aside. For now, retreat was undoubtedly the wiser, more pragmatic choice. But she carried with her the unwavering certainty that this precise moment had irrevocably changed something, fundamentally altering the landscape of her life. The next time she knew, she wouldn't merely warn them, she would act. Rachel slipped into her comfortable jeans, tied her hair back in a messy, defiant knot, and grabbed her trusty laptop bag. Without another word, not a single glance towards Helen or Frank, she walked out of the apartment, the door shutting behind her with a firm, resounding thud that felt to her like a small, exquisite act of liberation. The crisp, invigorating Denver morning air stung her cheeks as she stepped outside, and for the first time all day, she was able to breathe, deeply and fully, without the suffocating, crushing weight of her in-laws pressing down on her chest, stealing her air, stealing her peace. The digital invasion and a moment of clarity. Rachel found an immediate, much-needed refuge in a quiet corner booth of her favorite downtown cafe, a place where the warm, comforting hum of espresso machines and the gentle, hushed chatter of strangers always seemed to possess a soothing, almost medicinal quality for her frayed nerves. She ordered a strong black coffee, set up her laptop with determined precision, and resolved to lose herself completely in the familiar, absorbing rhythm of her work. If she couldn't find a moment of peace in her own home, she would carve it out here, among the anonymous faces and the steady, comforting beat of her own typing. For the first precious half hour, she yet managed to focus, truly focus. She sent out a flurry of emails, meticulously reviewed client reports, and even felt the oppressive tightness in her chest begin to subtly ease, a whisper of relief. But the fragile moment of quiet, the fleeting illusion of escape, didn't last. Her phone began to buzz with a relentless, insistent stream of notifications, a digital assault on her newfound tranquility. At first, she bravely ignored it, stubbornly unwilling to allow Helen's toxicity to invade this sanctuary as well. But the vibrations grew too persistent, too demanding to be dismissed. With a long, weary sigh, Rachel unlocked her phone and opened Facebook Messenger. The screen was instantly flooded with a deluge of messages from Helen, each one more vicious, more venomous than the last. The insults rained down, one after another, an ugly cascade of digital bile. Lazy, worthless, a disgrace. Some messages, dripping with pure, unadulterated venom, went even further, chillingly suggesting that Rachel didn't deserve to live in peace at all, that she was fundamentally unworthy of any contentment. One line in particular made her skin crawl, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "You'll regret the day you crossed me, maybe sooner than you think." Rachel stared at the words, a cold, hard wave of disgust washing over her, her stomach clenching violently, not out of fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming toxicity of it all. It was one thing, she realized, to hurl insults in person, in the heat of a moment, even when those moments were constant. It was an entirely different, far more sinister thing to type them out, to leave them in writing, deliberate and cruel, a permanent testament to hatred. She felt a tremor run through her hand as she scrolled, but her mind, beneath the surface of exhaustion, was already working, coolly, methodically. She took screenshots of every single message, careful not to miss a single word, a single poisonous phrase. She saved them meticulously in a folder on her phone, labeling it with the precise date and time, a digital archive of evidence. If Helen wanted to play this dangerous, ugly game, Rachel would meet her, not with anger, but with irrefutable proof. When the last screenshot was safely saved, she blocked Helen's number without a single moment of hesitation. The silence that followed was instant, profound, like slamming a heavy window shut on a raging storm, cutting off its howl. Rachel leaned back in her chair, the coffee on the table beside her long since gone cold. The gentle cafe hum carried on around her, a stark, almost surreal contrast to the ugliness she had just witnessed on her screen. She felt utterly drained, her body heavy with a profound fatigue that seeped deep into her bones. She had worked until 4 a.m, been violently jolted awake by ear-splitting screams, and now endured a barrage of sickening abuse from a woman who seemed utterly determined to break her, to shatter her spirit entirely. Still, amidst the bone-deep exhaustion, a quiet, profound realization was beginning to take root, blossoming in the desolate landscape of her mind. This wasn't just a bad morning. This wasn't merely a string of unlucky days, a temporary hardship she simply needed to get through. This, terrifyingly, was her life. Her life with Helen and Frank perpetually under her roof, and with Mark, her husband, inexplicably refusing to intervene, refusing to protect her. It was an environment utterly soaked in hostility, a toxic stew where she was expected to endure endless humiliation, to simply swallow her dignity, all in the misguided name of maintaining a semblance of peace. She unlocked her phone again, this time not to read, but to act, with a cold, clear purpose. She attached the carefully collected screenshots in a message to Mark, typing slowly, her words deliberate, each chosen with the weight of her new resolve. "I'm at the cafe downtown. We need to talk. Come here tonight." She hit send, placed the phone face down on the table, and shut her eyes for a moment. The fatigue seeped deeper into her bones, yes, but so did something else, something far more powerful. Clarity. Rachel could no longer lie to herself. She couldn't call this situation temporary or harmless any longer. The truth was unavoidable, stark and uncompromising. She could not live another day in that toxic space and still recognize herself, still retain any shred of her identity. The unwavering ultimatum. By the time the sun dipped behind the majestic Rockies, painting the Denver sky with hues of pale orange and deep violet, and the city streets began to glow with the promise of early evening, Rachel was still at the cafe. Her coffee had long gone cold, a forgotten relic, and her laptop sat closed in her bag, untouched for hours. She hadn't been working, she had simply been waiting. The quiet hum of the cafe a stark counterpoint to the storm brewing within her. At precisely 6 p.m., the bell above the cafe door chimed, a familiar sound that now carried the weight of destiny, and Mark walked in. He looked tired, yes, but not with the profound, soul-deep exhaustion that permeated Rachel. His fatigue was laced with irritation, as if merely being asked to show up, to engage, was an unbearable inconvenience, a chore he resented. He scanned the bustling room, his eyes finally landing on her. With a heavy theatrical sigh, he slid into the booth across from her, his expression already stormy, a prelude to the confrontation he clearly anticipated. "So," he began, without the slightest hint of a greeting, his tone immediately accusatory, weary, as though she, Rachel, were the problem he was perpetually forced to deal with. "What did you and Mom fight about this time?" Rachel sat upright, her posture rigid with a newfound resolve. Her voice was calm, astonishingly so, but imbued with an unshakable firmness. "Mark, this isn't just another fight. I want your parents to leave, tonight. I can't live like this anymore." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Rachel, you're exaggerating. Mom's blood pressure has been all over the place. She's sick. You know that. Dad's stressed out. They don't mean everything they say. And now you're pushing me to throw them out? Do you want me to just abandon them?" Her chest tightened painfully at his words, not because they surprised her, but because they were exactly what she had feared, what she had known, deep down, he would say. He wasn't just failing to defend her. He was actively taking his mother's side, tacitly justifying her cruelty, her relentless abuse. "I'm not asking you to abandon them," Rachel said, her voice meticulously controlled, each word carefully chosen. "I'm asking you to draw a boundary. They've insulted me. They've invaded our home, and you've done nothing to stop it. If you want to support them, rent them their own place. Visit as much as you want, but they cannot stay in our apartment any longer." Mark's eyes hardened, taking on a cold, unyielding glint. He leaned forward across the table, his voice sharp, almost a snarl. "This is my home, too. I have just as much right as you do to invite my parents to stay. You don't get to dictate who I let through that door." The final, fragile thread of restraint inside Rachel snapped. She felt a burning heat rise to her face, a flush of raw anger, but her voice emerged steady, unwavering, infused with a dangerous calm. "Then listen to me carefully. If they don't leave, I will. And if I leave, Mark, I won't be coming back. I will file for divorce." His mouth opened, then closed, a silent gasp. He was utterly caught off guard, blindsided by the sheer weight, the undeniable finality of her words. "Are you serious right now? You're making me choose between my family and my wife? Do you even hear yourself?" Rachel held his gaze, refusing to flinch, refusing to back down even an inch. "You're wrong. I'm not asking you to choose between them and me. I'm asking you to respect me enough to not force me into a hostile environment every single day. I'm asking for the bare minimum, to feel safe in my own home. If you can't give me that, then what exactly do I have left in this marriage?" Mark stared at her, his eyes narrowing to slits, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. His silence, a heavy, oppressive thing, told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't weighing her words, considering their profound implications. He was calculating how to push her back into submission, how to manipulate her back into the role he and his parents had assigned her. The moment stretched on, long and agonizing, the air between them thick with the crushing weight of unspoken truths. Rachel realized then, with a clarity that cut deep, that this wasn't really about Helen or Frank, or even the constant petty insults. This was fundamentally about Mark. He didn't want to protect her. He wanted her to bend, to shrink herself, to contort her very being until she fit perfectly into the narrow, suffocating role his parents had carved out for her. Her hands, she noticed, were steady now, the last vestiges of fear, the last flicker of hesitation, utterly gone. She had drawn her line, and she knew, with an absolute certainty, that she wouldn't step back. The marriage wasn't a partnership anymore. It was a brutal test of endurance she no longer wished to take. Rachel stood, slowly, deliberately, slipping her bag over her shoulder. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but utterly final. "Think about what I said. Either they leave or I do. But if I walk out, it's not just for tonight, it's for good." She left him sitting there in the booth, silent, motionless, the distorted reflection of the cafe's neon lights flickering across his stunned face. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Rachel felt the ground steady beneath her feet, solid and reassuring. She understood the profound, undeniable truth now. Her marriage had already cracked, fractured beyond any hope of repair. Mark didn't want to stand beside her as an equal. He wanted her to bow her head in subservience, and Rachel Adams was irrevocably done bowing. The irreversible choice. Mark, reeling from the force of her ultimatum, tried desperately to recover, his voice dropping into something almost pleading, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Look, Rachel, let's not blow this up. They'll only stay another week, maybe less. Mom just needs to get back on her feet. Dad will calm down. Can't you just hold on a little longer?" His words were clearly meant to soothe, to mollify. But to Rachel, they sounded utterly hollow, devoid of genuine concern or commitment. For 3 agonizing weeks, she had endured, telling herself each passing day would be the last, that the reprieve was just around the corner. But every time the intrusion had grown worse, the abuse more blatant, the tension more suffocating. She had learned a painful, indelible lesson. With Helen and Frank, there was never just one more week. Rachel folded her hands deliberately on the table, her tone even, unyielding. "No, Mark, I'm not waiting one more week or one more day. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'll come back for my things." Mark blinked, his expression tightening, a mix of disbelief and growing frustration. He hadn't expected her to remain so calm, so utterly resolute. "You're really going to walk out over this? Over my parents?" Rachel nodded, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Yes, because this isn't about them anymore. It's about you. You refuse to set boundaries. You refuse to protect me in my own home. That means I have to protect myself." Mark leaned forward, the frustration finally creeping fully into his voice, tinging it with exasperation. "So what? You're going to throw away our marriage over a couple of arguments with my parents? That's crazy." Her voice sharpened, though it never rose above a calm, chillingly precise level. "It's not a couple of arguments, Mark. It's a pattern. 3 weeks of humiliation. 3 weeks of silence from you. I won't keep living like this." She paused, then continued, her words deliberate and precise, each one landing with the weight of a stone. "And don't forget, this apartment is marital property. It belongs to both of us. If you want to keep it, you're still responsible for half the mortgage. You can't just let me walk away and pretend it's yours alone." That struck him. He stiffened, his jaw clenching, the reality of her words hitting him with brutal force. "So, you're already talking about dividing assets that fast?" Rachel held his gaze, unblinking. "I have to because I can see exactly where this is headed. I'm done waiting for things to get better when they never do." For a moment, Mark seemed to struggle, caught between raw anger and incredulous disbelief, as if he fully expected her to eventually cave, to relent, just as she always had. But this time, there was no hesitation, no flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Rachel rose slowly from her seat, slipping the strap of her bag over her shoulder with deliberate, measured movements. Her heart no longer trembled. It beat with a quiet, resolute strength. She felt the heavy weight of finality pressing down on her, but beneath it, there was something lighter, a profound sense of quiet resolve she hadn't felt in years, a dormant part of herself reawakening. "Tomorrow," she said firmly, her voice echoing with conviction, "I'll collect my things. I'll call an attorney. You'll hear from me about the divorce. And if you decide to keep this place, then remember, you'll be paying your share. Every month." Mark opened his mouth as if to argue, to unleash a fresh torrent of accusations, but no words came. He only sat there, staring, his face shifting rapidly between fury and a dawning, unwelcome fear. Rachel didn't wait for him to recover, didn't offer a single parting glance. She turned and walked out of the cafe, stepping purposefully into the cool, embracing Denver night. The city lights reflected in the glass windows, sharp and unyielding, mirroring the newfound clarity and unwavering determination of her own decision. For the first time in a very long time, her steps felt firm, her back straight and unbent. She wasn't leaving in defeat. She was leaving with undeniable purpose, with the strength of a woman who had finally found her voice. This, she knew, with every fiber of her being, was the point of no return. As she crossed the street, her bag pressed firmly to her side, there would be no reconciliation, no pretending that things could ever go back to the way they were. The marriage had been fractured too deeply, irreconcilably broken, and Mark had made his choice abundantly clear. He wanted obedience, not partnership. And Rachel Adams was irrevocably done giving him either. Reclaiming the foundation. The divorce itself, once the initial shock and legal skirmishes settled, was finalized with surprising swiftness. But what followed, the painstaking untangling of a shared life, was far from simple. The issue of the Denver apartment in particular became a bitter, drawn-out battle that stretched on for agonizing months. The court, with its meticulous review of all financial documents, ultimately confirmed what Rachel had already known would be the inevitable outcome. The apartment, having been purchased during the marriage with joint savings and a mortgage held in both their names, was undeniably marital property. The ruling was clear. It was to be split evenly, with each party retaining 50% ownership and both remaining equally responsible for the ongoing mortgage payments. Rachel, surprisingly, didn't fight this ruling. She understood it was the most practical, legally sound path forward. What she could no longer tolerate, however, was the thought of living under the same roof as Mark, or, God forbid, his parents. So, with a renewed sense of purpose, she found herself a small studio apartment across town, a modest but liberating space where she could finally breathe without the constant, suffocating intrusion of Helen's sharp voice or Frank's disapproving glare. It wasn't large by any means, but it was hers, undeniably hers. It was quiet, uncluttered, and filled only with her own carefully chosen possessions, each item a silent testament to her newfound autonomy. Even after moving out, Rachel steadfastly maintained her 50% ownership of the original apartment, fiercely determined not to surrender her rights, not to yield another inch of what was rightfully hers. Mark, choosing convenience and the illusion of control, stayed in the larger apartment, clinging to the space rather than considering any form of downsizing. At first, he dutifully paid his share of the mortgage, though not without frequent grumbling and thinly veiled complaints about the costs. But as weeks slowly turned into months, his discipline began to falter, cracks appearing in his financial facade. Bills piled up. Deadlines for payments were missed. Rachel, unwavering in her commitment, continued to cover her half, meticulously sending in her portion of the payment on time every single month. But she watched with a grim sense of inevitability as Mark began to slip further and further behind. The pattern became chillingly clear. He simply wasn't managing. Whether it was due to poor budgeting, a stubborn pride that prevented him from asking for help, or simply his parents' continued encouragement to focus on anything but responsibility, the result was the same. Ominous notices from the bank began to arrive in the mail, stark warnings that their patience was not, in fact, endless. Rachel, meanwhile, poured every ounce of her renewed energy into her work. Her projects flourished, her client base expanded, and her income grew steadily. Her life in the studio, though modest, gave her the stability and emotional space she had so desperately craved. But she could see the storm gathering around the apartment, a dark cloud on the horizon. And though Mark might have foolishly thought he could simply let the debt slide indefinitely, Rachel knew better. The mortgage was a powerful, unyielding legal tether, binding them together, and his failures, his escalating irresponsibility, could very easily drag her down too, jeopardizing her hard-won peace. The tension between them didn't miraculously fade after the divorce decree was signed. It merely shifted, transforming from personal arguments into bitter financial standoffs. Rachel reminded him more than once, with carefully worded emails and documented phone calls, that he was still legally responsible, that neglecting payments would have severe consequences for them both. But her warnings seemed to fall on stubbornly deaf ears. Mark, in a display of characteristic defiance, insisted he could handle it, despite the mounting pile of overdue notices that told a very different, far more alarming story. It was a bitter irony, a cruel twist of fate. He had fought so fiercely to keep his parents in that apartment, to proudly claim it as his undisputed domain. Yet when finally given the chance to hold it entirely on his own, to prove his supposed mastery, he began, inexorably, to lose his grip. For Rachel, it was deeply frustrating, but in a way, not surprising at all. She had seen the fundamental cracks in his character, the inherent weaknesses, long before the court had put anything in writing. Now, living independently, Rachel harbored no illusions about reconciliation. The marriage was irrevocably over, the love long gone, and the apartment was no longer a home. It was a liability, a shared weight she desperately wanted to shed. She was patient, yes, but she also knew with chilling certainty that an opportunity was coming. If Mark couldn't keep up with his share, the bank would inevitably intervene. And when that happened, Rachel intended to be ready. A new foundation, built on her terms. Months dragged on, each day bringing with it a fresh wave of anxiety and a deepening sense of dread. The warning letters from the bank, once polite reminders, grew increasingly urgent, their tone sharp with impending action. Mark, true to Rachel's grim prediction, had completely stopped making his mortgage payments. Rachel, against all reasonable advice, kept covering her share, a futile attempt to stave off the inevitable. But a mortgage didn't function that way. When one owner defaulted, both were at grave risk. The late fees mounted, a relentless, escalating tally, and eventually, with a chilling inevitability, the worst happened. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Rachel received the notice with a sinking feeling, a heavy weight settling in her stomach. But she didn't let panic take hold, didn't allow despair to paralyze her. Instead, she acted quickly, decisively. She scheduled an immediate meeting with the bank's representatives, walking into the sterile office with a thick folder of meticulously organized documents clutched firmly in her hands. It contained undeniable proof of her consistent, timely payments, detailed records of her thriving income, and, critically, the damning screenshots of correspondence, undeniable evidence of Mark's willful neglect. She sat across from the loan officer, outwardly calm but internally steeling herself, her voice firm, resolute. "I want to resolve this," she told them, her gaze unwavering. "I'm prepared to cover the arrears, bring the loan completely current, and assume the responsibility for the entire mortgage myself. But in return, I'll need full ownership of the property. You know as well as I do that Mark isn't paying and won't. Let me take this off your books cleanly, without the mess of a prolonged foreclosure." The negotiation was tense, a delicate dance of legalities and finances, but surprisingly short. The bank, pragmatic and weary of prolonged battles, didn't want a foreclosure dragging interminably through the courts. It was a costly, time-consuming nightmare for them. Rachel's offer was the simplest, most efficient solution. She agreed to pay the entire outstanding balance, covering all the late fees and Mark's missed payments, and to restructure the mortgage entirely under her name alone. Mark's original share, once valued at a substantial 50% of the property, was now reduced significantly, almost negligible, because of his consistent delinquency and failure to uphold his end of the legal agreement. In effect, Rachel bought him out, not through a contentious negotiation, but through his own financial negligence, acquiring his share for far less than the property's true market worth. When Mark finally found out, he exploded. A furious torrent of messages flooded her phone, accusing her of trickery, of betrayal, of underhanded maneuvering. He even went so far as to file a lawsuit, claiming she had conspired behind his back, a desperate, futile attempt to reclaim what he had willingly forfeited. But the court dismissed his complaint swiftly, unequivocally. Everything Rachel had done was above board, meticulously documented, and entirely legal. She had simply given the bank the money it was owed, the money Mark had failed to provide, and in return, she had secured what was rightfully hers through her diligence, her bend to break her spirit, to force her into submission. His parents had tried, with relentless cruelty, to strip her of her dignity, to invalidate her very existence. In the end, all three of them were left with nothing but bitterness, their own self-inflicted wounds. Rachel, on the other hand, had reclaimed far more than just a piece of property. She had reclaimed her independence, her peace of mind, her future. The ink on the bank's agreement was still fresh, barely dry, but Rachel already felt an immense, unimaginable weight lift from her chest, a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The apartment that had once symbolized control, oppression, and endless conflict now marked the glorious, undeniable end of her suffering. Standing in the profound, healing silence, she realized it was more than just real estate. It was irrefutable proof that she had endured the darkest of storms, fought back with fierce determination, and ultimately, against all odds, won. Rachel Adams was no longer a woman cornered by her hateful in-laws or abandoned by a spineless husband. She was the sole, proud owner of her home, finally free from the chains of their demands, their expectations, their toxic presence. The marriage was truly over, the battles decisively finished, and for the first time in years, the brutal war inside those walls had at long last found its peaceful, triumphant end. A future reclaimed. In the months that followed, Rachel poured herself, body and soul, into her work. Without the daily chaos of Helen and Frank perpetually invading her space, without the constant draining tension of waiting for Mark to turn on her, her focus sharpened with astonishing clarity. Projects that once felt draining, like a siphon extracting her very life force, now energized her, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose and creative drive. She took on new, challenging clients, expanded her professional portfolio with confident ambition, and slowly, meticulously, built a substantial financial cushion that made her feel secure, deeply rooted, in a way she never had before. The studio apartment she had initially rented remained her cherished refuge, quiet and uncluttered, a testament to her journey. But she often returned to the larger condo she now fully owned, savoring the profound, liberating silence of its rooms. For the first time in years, the space belonged unequivocally to her, and only her. Her spirit, slowly but surely, began to heal. The bone-deep exhaustion that had once been a constant companion started to lift, replaced by a steadier, more resilient kind of strength. She went for long, invigorating walks in the crisp Colorado air, spent tranquil afternoons in cafes by choice rather than desperation, and even to her surprise, rediscovered hobbies she had reluctantly abandoned during the suffocating years of her marriage. Slowly, beautifully, the oppressive weight of those painful years pressed less and less on her shoulders, replaced by a lightness that allowed her to breathe freely, to truly live. It was during this precious season of profound renewal, of self-discovery and rebuilding, that she met Daniel Cooper. Their paths crossed, quite serendipitously, at a networking event downtown. He was a project manager in a local tech firm, confident in his abilities but devoid of arrogance, approachable in a warm, genuine way that immediately put Rachel at ease. Their first conversation was simple, unburdened by expectation. A discussion about work, about favorite hiking spots near Boulder, about the mundane, beautiful things that make up a life. But there was something in his eyes, a profound steadiness, a quiet strength that Rachel hadn't realized she had been searching for, had unknowingly yearned for. They began meeting for coffee, then dinners. Daniel never pushed, never demanded, never sought to diminish her. He listened, truly listened, to every word she spoke. He respected her boundaries, always. When she spoke, hesitantly at first, about her painful past, He didn't minimize it, didn't offer empty platitudes, or attempt to change the subject with uncomfortable haste. He simply acknowledged it with a gentle understanding, and in doing so helped her feel profoundly seen, profoundly understood, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It was a sharp, almost jarring contrast to the casual dismissiveness she had endured for so long. As weeks gracefully turned into months, their relationship deepened, blossoming naturally, organically. Daniel admired Rachel's fierce independence, but also gently reminded her that she didn't have to carry the entire weight of the world or her past alone. He showed up when he said he would, always. He called when he promised. He valued her career not as a mere hobby, not as playing on the computer, but as a real, legitimate accomplishment, a testament to her intelligence and drive. Slowly, cautiously, Rachel allowed herself to trust again, to open her heart to the possibility of a different, brighter future. Eventually, the day came when they decided, together, to live together. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel when Daniel, with a hopeful smile, suggested moving into her condo, the very place that had once symbolized so much pain, so many battles, so much profound betrayal. At first, she hesitated, a fleeting shadow of old memories, remembering the screaming matches, the violently slammed doors, the venomous words that had poisoned those rooms. But as she stood in those familiar spaces, now infused with a new light beside Daniel, she realized with a rush of clarity that the apartment had transformed. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was ready. It was ready to become a true home, built on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet, unwavering love. They moved in together one crisp autumn weekend, the air outside smelling of turning leaves and fresh beginnings. Boxes piled playfully in the living room, laughter echoing down the hallway as they argued playfully, lovingly, over where to place the bookshelves, where to hang a new piece of art. That night, as they sat on the comfortable couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, a symphony of their shared future, Rachel looked around and felt something she hadn't felt in years, something profound and utterly pervasive. Peace. She thought back to the long, arduous road that had led her here, the insults, the betrayals, the draining courtroom battles, the lonely nights spent in a rented studio. None of it had been easy, not a single moment. But every single challenge, every painful step had carried her, inexorably, to this precise moment. Divorce, she realized with a jolt of understanding, hadn't been a failure at all. It had been, unequivocally, the doorway to her freedom. Now, with Daniel's strong, warm hand resting gently over hers, she could see the future clearly, unclouded by doubt or fear. It was a life built not on endurance, not on compromise born of fear, but on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a quiet, profound love. The condo was no longer a battlefield, a symbol of past trauma. It was the solid, beautiful foundation of a new beginning, a testament to her strength. As evening settled once again over Denver, casting its soft glow across the city, Rachel leaned back against Daniel, her eyes tracing the mesmerizing city lights through the window. The apartment was filled, not with shouting or judgment, but with a gentle, hopeful hum of possibility. And in that perfect, serene stillness, Rachel knew the truth, a truth that resonated deep within her soul. She hadn't lost a marriage, she had gained herself. And in doing so, she had found a love truly worthy of the remarkable woman she had become.